I grew up with my Métis family on a First Nation reserve in Manitoba, Canada. Because I wasn't First Nation, I had to be bussed off reserve to go to school. My teachers and fellow students were mostly Caucasian, and I grew up feeling a little out of place. We only attended the church in our community for a wedding or a funeral, traditional ceremonies during treaty days, but the music of the Métis always filled our home. I had no formal schooling of faith, but there was a God in my life who talked to me, displayed power, performed miracles, made my night dreams come true, and déjà vu was something that would happen often. It never occurred to me to talk about my experiences, but that would change. I left home at a very young age and had a number of close encounters with death. Wanting to understand the purpose of my existence, I sought out this earlier God I had encounters with. He returned with full force and led me to the Hebrew Scriptures, known in English as the Bible. He gave me clear instructions to go to Israel, learn Hebrew, and understand from Genesis to Revelations how everything fit together. This was a daunting recipe for me, as I was now a single mom with 4 children to support. But I did. And in 2006 I went to Israel. After I met and married my husband, we took Hebrew lessons together. A diligent study of the scriptures and the history of the church led me to the edict in 330 AD by Roman Emperor Constantine, outlining the incorporation of the worship of Jesus, but the removal of anything relating to Jewish worship. Passover was replaced with the fertile goddess Estar, known as Easter, the sun god Sol Invictus Mithras' birthday during the winter solstice, incorporated the birth of Jesus. The observance of Shabbat was outlawed and replaced with worship of the sun god on Sunday. I investigated other Jewish books, such as the Talmud, and discovered customs and traditions that were added to the community. Returning back to the scriptures with all this knowledge in hand, I discovered a Jewish Messiah who taught the observance of the Torah. I began observing the Shabbat and celebrating the biblical feasts as outlined by the scriptures. My desire to live in Israel as a citizen deepened, but I suspected that only Jewish descendants could become citizens. This all changed when DNA testing revealed I was Jewish, and I had received Jewish markers from both my parents. Both my parents were Jewish, and I never knew it, and I'm sure they didn't know it either.
Ruth, I'm glad we have this opportunity to go over your results. You took our DNA Fingerprint Plus from DNA Consultants, and that is a complete analysis of all of your ancestry. You have 2 Jewish markers on one location on your genome. That's known to us as Jewish 3, and the fact that you have 2 markers there can only mean that you got some degree of Jewish ancestry from both parents. And Jewish 3 is very, very characteristic of Sephardic Jews. I lived in Spain during the Middle Ages, in France, and also in England. Now, the Spanish Inquisition's operations, they had so much power, they got to confiscate all of your belongings the entire time you were in the Inquisitions. If they decided that you were still practicing Judaism despite saying that you were Christian, then you had to do penance, and they put you in a dunce's hat with a star. They marched you through the marketplace, and they could have burned you alive. Those were called auto da fés, and they were still doing auto da fés in the 18th century. It was a big public spectacle. It was like a circus. For these auto da fés, people would come in from miles around, crowd around to see these Jews who were called heretics, burned alive. It's estimated that 400,000 Jews fled Spain after 1492. And it's also estimated that 800,000 of the French Huguenots, who were also persecuted by the Catholics, were actually Spanish Jews. It was not very popular to acknowledge your Jewish ancestry in many places of Europe.
I'm on my way to Temple Shalom to meet with Ruthie. She's a teacher in Judaic studies, and she's going to tell me a little bit about the Holocaust and some of the things that happened and what happened after the Holocaust. And it's pretty exciting for me to be going to a synagogue, because I know now that that was a very important place to my ancestors. For thousands of years, that's where they have gathered to meet as a community and to worship.
My name is Ruthie Sudak Maman. I was born here in Winnipeg, but lived most of my life in Israel. Went to the university there, got my teacher's degree, and was a teacher there for many years, and came back to live in Winnipeg, and I have been a Judaics teacher, educator for the last 17 years here in Winnipeg. During the reign of Queen Isabella, the Jews in Spain were told that they must convert to become Christians or face being burnt at the stake. Many managed to wander their way to the Americas, to Cuba, Mexico, south of the United States. Ever since then, and all through the years, the Jewish people have been persecuted. During the Holocaust, the 6 million Jews were executed. Whole communities were rounded up, buried in a mass grave. They were taken in cattle cars to the concentration camps, where en masse they were also gassed and murdered. And only after many years of this happening, what was going on, did the rest of the world actually realize, so that this would never happen again. The Jewish people had their homeland and a place where they could live in safety. The United Nations came about for a good reason, because yes, they saw what was happening and they said no more. And today, with all our ability to test through DNA, have discovered that they are their background, their ancestry they were Jewish.
When my results first came in, I was shocked. I suspected that they had somebody else's mixed up with mine, because there was no way that could be possible. But now that I understand the persecution that happened, some of them would have chose to convert. Some of them would have chose to change their names. Some of them would have chosen to not practice anything that would identify them as a Jew. I can only imagine that you wouldn't tell your children if you wanted to keep something a secret, to keep yourself alive. So the children grew up not knowing, and things just carried on. And you no longer identified with your Jewishness. You called yourself a person of that country. Scottish, English, French, maybe even Spanish. He called me when I was a young girl, and he led me to a place of truth. First to his word, and then to who I am. I know I'll just take one step at a time, but I do know that my whole life has changed. I am not the same that I was before I found out. I really am different now. For me, I am complete. I am completely now who I always wanted to be, and now I know who I was meant to be. So what do you do when things are not always as you thought they